We have got a genuinely wild stretch of weather setting up right now, and by the time we get through today's forecast, you're going to understand exactly why. There's a multi-day severe weather outbreak already underway, a fresh blast of Canadian air about to sweep through the Great Lakes and Northeast, and right behind it, a serious surge of heat that's going to come roaring back into the plains just in time for the weekend. On top of all of that, we're keeping a close eye on the tropics, because it looks like our first hurricane of the season could be getting ready to spin up in the Atlantic. There's a lot to get through, so let's not waste any time and jump straight into it. Let's start with today, which is Tuesday, because we already have a fairly serious, severe weather setup in place. Forecasters have placed two separate slight risk zones on the map. The first stretches from Texas up through Nebraska, and the second sits over Minnesota and Wisconsin. Surrounding both of those slight risk areas is a much broader marginal threat that runs from the Midwest down into the southern plains, and there's also a separate marginal risk zone tucked into the southeast. The headline concern today is damaging wind. If you're anywhere in Kansas, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, or even New Mexico, there is a real possibility of gusts reaching 80 miles an hour out of some of these storms. Large hail is also very much in play, with stones up to golf ball size expected to be possible. And while the tornado threat today is on the lower end, it is not zero, especially for folks around Minneapolis, Duluth, and Eau Claire, Wisconsin. If you live in that corridor, now is a good time to make sure your tornado plan is fresh in your mind, because there's a decent chance we see at least a couple of rotating supercells develop. And if that happens, there's a real possibility of a live stream going up, so keep an eye on the channel just in case. As we move into Wednesday, the focus of the severe threat shifts eastward into the Midwest. Illinois finds itself under that threat once again, along with Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan, and the slight and marginal risk area actually stretches all the way down into the lower Mississippi Valley. There's also a separate slight risk sitting over eastern Colorado. Just like Tuesday, damaging wind is the number one concern, and once again, we could see gusts over 80 miles an hour out in the high plains. Beyond that, expect the potential for scattered damaging wind reports stretching from the southern plains all the way up into Michigan, with large hail specifically possible around Lafayette, Fort Wayne, and Springfield, Illinois. But here's the part of Wednesday that really deserves your attention. There is a genuinely elevated tornado threat in play, and it's centered on Fort Wayne, Indiana, and stretching into the far southern part of Michigan, where a handful of tornadoes are considered possible. On top of that, there's a broader 2% tornado risk zone that actually includes Chicago and Joliet, extends down through Kankakee, and also covers Detroit, Grand Rapids, and Toledo, Ohio. At this point, it probably won't surprise anyone that Illinois lands in another tornado risk zone, because that state has quietly become one of the most tornado-prone spots in the entire country throughout 2026. Given the setup, there's a solid chance we go live again on Wednesday, so make sure notifications are turned on so you don't miss it. Let's walk through exactly how the timing plays out over these 2 days, because the details matter if you're trying to plan around this. For today, Tuesday, expect a few supercells to begin forming just north of Minneapolis sometime between 4 and 5 o'clock this afternoon. The main area to watch will run up and down the I-35 corridor. If any of these storms manage to mature and strengthen, there's a genuine risk of an isolated tornado, and that risk window looks to run roughly from 6 to 8 o'clock right along the Wisconsin and Minnesota border. At the same time, this is happening up north. There will be additional storms spinning around a low-pressure system sitting over in Canada, and those could also bring significant wind gusts along with their own isolated tornado risk. Around 7 o'clock, that batch of storms will continue pushing through Rice Lake and head toward Eau Claire, and after 8 o'clock, they'll move on into Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As we get into the late evening and overnight hours, most of this activity should start to weaken, meaning the tornado threat across Wisconsin should taper off by roughly 10:30 Central Time. Once things calm down, that same system will settle into more of a general rain event across the Midwest and Great Lakes overnight. Meanwhile, farther south and west, the Central Plains are in for a genuinely active day. A few more supercells are expected to fire up in northern Nebraska, and those will carry the risk of isolated large hail, damaging wind, and a smaller chance of a tornado. Then, as the evening rolls in, a larger cluster of storms is expected to organize, and that's likely to bring a widespread damaging wind threat to places like Colby, North Platte, and Garden City. Even into the very early hours of Wednesday morning, there's a chance some of that activity is still tracking toward the Kansas City area and pushing through Salina before it finally loses steam. Then Wednesday itself brings another active round. Storms should start firing up around 2 o'clock in the afternoon over Michigan, and initially the main concern will be isolated damaging wind gusts, along with a lower-end tornado risk. But as the afternoon progresses, and especially once we get into the mid-afternoon window, atmospheric parameters tied to tornado potential are expected to climb sharply across northern Indiana and Michigan. Wind shear will also be elevated in that same northern Indiana zone, which sets the stage for favorable tornado conditions. It's going to come down to exactly how the storms organize, but there's a good chance at least one, and possibly two, supercells develop near Lake Michigan before tracking across the I-94 corridor towards South Bend. That window looks to run from about 3 o'clock through 5:30 Central Time, and by 5 or 6 o'clock, there's a chance multiple supercells are active simultaneously. From there, though, those storms are expected to consolidate fairly quickly into a solid line, which shifts the primary threat towards straight-line damaging winds as we move into the evening. Even so, for most of the mid to late afternoon stretch, the tornado risk should remain elevated across that Indiana and Michigan zone. After 8 o'clock, the line is expected to press on toward Indianapolis, though it will likely fall apart before it ever reaches Cincinnati or Columbus, and by late evening, things should be clearing out. Back over the Central Plains on Wednesday, current model guidance doesn't show a ton of organized storm activity through the high plains, but whatever does form there still carries the potential for significant damaging winds, large hail, and an isolated tornado. There's also a scenario worth watching where a large cluster of thunderstorms develops over the Mississippi Valley late Wednesday night into the overnight hours. If that trend holds, we'd be looking at a lot of lightning, strong straight-line winds, and a fairly low tornado risk. But it's something we'll need to keep tracking closely across both the Mississippi and Tennessee valleys. By Thursday, the primary severe weather threat relocates up into the northeast, tied to a low-pressure system that will be tracking just north of Ottawa. That setup should bring at least an isolated tornado risk, though the main concern will be damaging wind gusts. The tornado threat looks slightly more elevated near Albany and Burlington during the late afternoon hours. The core time window for Thursday's storms in that region runs from about 3 o'clock Eastern through roughly 8 o'clock, though the activity should trend more linear as we approach 6 to 7 o'clock, which means damaging wind gusts up to around 70 miles an hour become the main story. Things should wind down heading into early Friday morning, with maybe one final round of storms pushing through Pennsylvania, the Washington, D.C. area, New Jersey, and Delaware. Down in the southeast, Thursday afternoon and evening also look fairly stormy, with isolated damaging winds possible from any storms that manage to fire up, which is honestly a pretty typical pattern for this time of year in August. Looking ahead to the end of the week and into the weekend, a brand new storm system is expected to take shape across the northern plains. Friday could bring some isolated severe weather to the Dakotas, Nebraska, and possibly southwestern Minnesota. By Saturday, that system looks better organized, with a more likely chance of severe weather across North Dakota and Minnesota. Then on Sunday, that same system may push an isolated severe weather risk into the Midwest and Great Lakes region, although there's considerably more uncertainty surrounding exactly how Sunday plays out. In fact, there's a chance a second separate storm system develops over the Central Plains that same day. And if that happens, it could bring its own round of isolated severe thunderstorms as we head into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, with this potential threat area stretching anywhere from the Central Plains into the Great Lakes. Pushing even further out toward the middle of next week, which will already be the first week of September, there's still a lot of uncertainty nationally about exactly where additional storm activity will set up. But one thing that is becoming increasingly likely is the possibility that we could see our first hurricane of the season take shape out in the Atlantic. To be clear, nothing has actually formed yet, so until an actual tropical storm develops, we won't know for certain whether it eventually strengthens into a hurricane. That said, the odds appear fairly favorable, mainly because this disturbance looks to be tracking into an environment with relatively low wind shear and plenty of available moisture, without much dry air working against it, all of which points toward a good chance of development. Most of the current model guidance and ensemble data keep the system staying well out over the open Atlantic, but if that trend changes at all, we'll be sure to update you. Regardless of its eventual track, it does look like this could grow into a fairly powerful system. According to the latest outlook from the National Hurricane Center, there's currently a 70% chance of formation within the main development region over the next 7 days. There's also a separate area being watched just northeast of Bermuda, which currently carries about a 40% chance of becoming a tropical storm within the next 2 days, so that's another spot worth keeping tabs on. Meanwhile, the Pacific Ocean is operating on an entirely different level this year. It has been an absurdly active season out there, with so many systems forming that we're already up to the letter I on the naming list, and we're likely to move into the letter J very soon. Beyond that, there are currently 3 separate areas being monitored for development, all carrying at least a medium chance of formation. None of these systems are currently expected to have any impact on the United States, but we'll continue watching all of them closely in case any of them eventually try to track toward Mexico, California, or Hawaii. Now let's shift over to temperatures, because there's a pretty dramatic swing coming over the next several days. Right now, the hottest conditions are staying largely confined to Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and the desert Southwest. Meanwhile, that cooler air is going to continue to sit over the Great Lakes and Northeast, and honestly, it's shaping up to be some really pleasant weather for that part of the country. We'll actually get another reinforcing shot of chilly air moving through the Midwest on Friday, and Friday morning temperatures are expected to fall into the 40s and 50s across most of Wisconsin and Minnesota, which is a pretty notable dip for late August. Then, right around the weekend, the pattern flips, and heat is going to begin surging northward in a big way. If you're in Kansas City or Omaha, Nebraska, you should expect temperatures to climb close to the triple digits by Saturday. From there, that heat continues to push eastward into Sunday and Monday, spreading toward St. Louis and further into the Mississippi River Valley, including areas around Memphis, Tennessee. As we move into the early part of September, this heat looks likely to stick around across the central and southern plains, and it could get especially intense over Kansas during that first week of the new month. On the flip side, that cooler, more comfortable air should hold on across the northern plains and Midwest, continuing what has honestly been a really beautiful stretch of late summer weather for that region. It's genuinely been a fantastic summer if you live anywhere in the Midwest, aside from all the severe weather that's come with it, and it's shaping up to be great weather for anyone looking to get outside. That covers everything we're tracking for today, but with a setup this active, things could shift quickly, so stay tuned for updates. As always, thank you so much for watching, and if you're new here, go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything. Also, don't forget to check out the free Weatherfront app, which gives you live radar, live storm chaser feeds, computer model data, satellite imagery, and a bunch of other useful tools, with even more features on the way. It's available on iOS, Android, and desktop, and you'll find the links down in the description. Given how active this pattern looks over the next couple of days, there's a real chance we go live again today or tomorrow, so make sure you're subscribed and have that bell icon turned on so you get notified the moment anything happens. We'll see you in the next video, or possibly live very soon.